So today we have Miss Fatima Gatella. Did I say that right?
That's correct. Yes.
And she is known as the informatics nurse. So, Fatima, can you just tell me how you got into nursing?
Um, Hi, Brian. Good morning.
Good morning.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to speak with you this morning. Um, so, very long story short, how I got into nursing is because it was expected of me. As many Filipinos
Hmm.
um, knew, um, our families or some of our families back in the Philippines, specifically, speaking from my experience, um, had started expecting some of their children to go into nursing many, many years back. And that has continued to be somewhat of a tradition.
Hmm.
And so, being an obedient child, um, I went with what my parents expected me to do, even though I actually had something else that I wanted to do. I had had gotten accepted to the School of Journalism at one of the top universities in the Philippines.
Wow.
Um, but um, again, being a dutiful um, daughter, I went into nursing, but I actually eventually found my own niche in nursing, and so I'm happy to chat about that.
Perfect, of course. And did you do your schooling, your nursing schooling in the Philippines?
Yes, I did. So I had my Bachelor of Science in Nursing in the Philippines, and I actually didn't come to the US until I was 30 years old. So I kind of had a late start in my nursing career in the US.
Mhm. And did you start working at a medical center right away when you got here, or where did you start?
I'll summarize my journey, and then we can come back to
Okay.
certain pieces of it in a later on. So when I first came to the US, I was under contract at a hospital in Florida. And so I went there for a couple years. My first few months, I actually worked as a CNA, or certified nursing assistant, while I was waiting for my nursing license to come through because I took it for a different state and then I had to wait for reciprocity. So I stayed in Florida for a couple years, a little over a couple years. I worked as a med surge nurse there, very busy
Yeah.
med surge nurse floor, as you can imagine. And then once my contract ended, I moved to California. I moved to the Silicon Valley with my hubby. And that's when I started working at an academic medical center, one of the top in the world. And there I started at the step down ICU. And after about a year, I moved to the neurosurge trauma ICU. So that was kind of the last clinical or bedside role that I had as a nurse, because after the ICU, I went on to my first nursing informatics job at another large academic medical center, also very highly regarded as one of the best in the world. And from then, I never looked back. I pursued my nursing informatics career after my first job, which was Epic Application Analyst.
Oh, wow.
I went on to become a project consultant um, at another academic medical center, this time in the Midwest. So I was working for my client in the Midwest and still living in California at that time.
Oh, wow. What made you decide to go into informatics and leave the bedside?
So this is when we would go back to my first job in the
Mhm.
US. When I first came to that job it was actually a small community hospital. But one of the things that really impressed me when I started there was that they were already using electronic charting, computer charting,
Mhm.
and um, and I was floored because in back in the Philippines we were still charting exclusively on paper.
Paper.
Um, and then the other thing that I really liked, for some reason, was that we did barcode medication scanning. I thought it was really, it was very efficient for me,
Hmm.
very helpful. Although we had to like push around these huge carts, which were the computer on wheels was
Yeah.
on top of the cart, and then the rest of the cart was your medication cart, and so you had to push that like across the
The
hallway.
whole unit.
And then the barcode scanner was huge, like it was almost the length of my forearm,
Oh
and
wow.
you kind of had to like position yourself in the room with the barcode scanner, and it was an interesting time. But what amazed me at that time was the ability for nurses to do that, to just chart directly in the computer, have that information stored for the next shift, for the next nurse.
Hmm.
And so I started asking my friends and my coworkers, like who made these things? Like, were nurses involved in making these things? And unfortunately, none of them knew really at that time. Um, it wasn't until I had completed my stay there and gone to California um, that the specialty was given a name. Someone told me this is called nursing informatics, and
Hmm.
I was just really thrilled um, to learn about that. It also helped that I'm kind of a geek, so I like technology. I like technology. I like science fiction. I'm a Star Trek fan. So that combination of like interest, right, and some
Hmm.
aptitude also was really what propelled me into nursing informatics. And just to continue my journey from earlier,
Hmm.
I did not stop at being a project consultant. I did that for a little over 3 years, and then I decided that I wanted to become, um, to work more locally.
Hmm.
So I applied at another academic medical center. So my path really, so far in my nursing career journey here in the U.S., is academic medical centers. All of them very highly regarded, and so I took a local job, and that's where I've been for the past 8 years.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
How long were you a bedside nurse until you transferred into the informatics?
I think it was a little over five. Oh, no, sorry. It was a little, let me repeat. I think it was a little over 7 years because I
Oh, okay.
stayed for 2.5 years in Florida, and then the rest of the time I was in the Bay Area.
Perfect. And so you're the first like informatics nurse on this channel. I have one friend that actually works as an informatics nurse, and to be honest, I have
Mhm.
like a lot of other people, I have no idea what you
Um,
guys do. So can you so can I you already touched upon it a little bit. So can you go into what you could do as an informatics nurse?
Yes. So great question. We actually do a lot of different things.
Mhm.
And I think for the most part, most of the nurses that I've spoken with think that it's basically something to do with the EMR or the EHR.
Mhm.
And that's just really one area. To sort of paraphrase the definition given by the American Nurses Association, there's three keywords to think about when you're thinking about nursing informatics. The
Mhm.
first is, of course, nursing, right? The second is data, and then the third is technology. So, what nursing informatics does, or what happens in nursing informatics, is you marry or combine your knowledge and skills about nursing, especially, being an advocate for the patients, being an advocate for fellow clinicians, your knowledge about clinical workflows, clinical activities, even clinical mindset.
Mhm.
And then you combine that with your ability to transform data into information. And not just any information, it has to be meaningful. You need to be able to gain insight from the data that you collected
Mhm.
and or stored. and to like detect patterns, to connect the dots. And then the third piece is you use technology to improve things. Usually, what you're trying to improve is you're trying to improve outcomes. So, outcomes for the family, outcomes for the patient, outcomes for the family, the community. Um, but also, you can improve the processes, right, for your fellow clinicians, your fellow nurses, even for providers and allied health, even your own hospital or organization's operations. And all of that um, lead you or help you to improve things for the patient, improve outcomes for the patient. So those are the three key things
Mhm.
that I like to share that helps you remember what informatics is all about. Um, the other thing that I use as a metaphor when explaining nursing informatics to other nurses is that we're sort of like the translators
Mhm.
between two worlds, where you have your purely clinical like stakeholders who speak clinical language and think in clinical terms, and then you have your technical world where they also use their own terminologies, right? And
Mhm.
they have their own mindset. And you put yourself in the place where you're helping them speak each other's language or help, translate what the clinicians want to share with the
Mhm.
technical people and what the technical people want to share with the clinicians. And you act as a bridge to make sure that everyone is working together towards a common goal.
That's awesome. And how do you become a nursing informatics nurse? Do you need a advanced degree or anything like that?
So that's another very good question. And there are actually different ways of getting into this career path.
Mhm.
Certainly, getting an advanced degree is one of them, especially if you want, a strong academic and foundational knowledge. Let's say, for example, you're very new to to the idea of nursing informatics. You haven't done your own research or gone to like boot camps or taking courses, then getting into a formal academic education path is one way of getting all that foundational knowledge. Another way that nurses can get into nursing informatics is through the more practical route where they learn at work and get
Mhm.
introduced to the concepts at work. And so, examples of these would be some nurses who start by being electronic health record super users, such as myself. So, I
Mhm.
was an EHR super user 2 times before I decided that this was really it for me. This was a specialty that I really wanted to be in. Other nurses have a different pathway where they start out as chart auditors, for example, like they do volunteer work
Mhm.
in their home unit as chart auditors, and then they become members of like quality and safety council, for example. And from there, they get hired to a quality and safety department in their hospital, and then they start doing projects that implement improvements based on the data that they collect as quality and safety nurses. So lots of different paths and also lots of different roles.
Yeah, for sure, because, like, so when it comes down to, like, graduate school, I've always
Mhm.
recently started seeing informatics as being one of the options in some of the schools around me, and usually everyone goes for their NP or their CRNA or
Mhm.
education, and only recently I've been seeing more people go into the informatics route. And like how we were talking about before we started recording, I have maybe one friend that actually works as an informatics nurse, and then I have a few that graduated with their masters in informatics but are having a hard time finding a job. And I've always wondered why that is.
Mm.
So and I know this is probably your niche because I'm on your website right now. Like,
Yeah.
how do you, how would you look, since you already said there's so
Mhm.
many different things in nursing informatics, how could you, since we're so clinical at a certain point,
Mhm.
how could you find out which part of the informatics world would you fit in, or like find that job?
Okay, so those are, I think,
A lot of
two
questions.
different
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm really happy to hear that you're very interested and very excited to learn about this. Um, so one of the metaphors that I also share is that switching into a different specialty, such as nursing informatics, where it's not necessarily a clinical specialty anymore,
Mhm.
it's kind of like going back to school, back to nursing school, where in nursing school you had your first few years putting together your academic, your knowledge foundation, and then towards the end of the school program, then you had your sim labs, you had your practical experience at the bedside, right?
Mhm.
And that's how you gained your skills. Now, I think one of the areas where there seems to be a gap, and it's not with all programs, but there seems to be a gap either with specific programs or just with specific maybe individuals or mindsets where um, some nurses that I've met believe that just getting the degree or the diploma was the end all and be all,
Mhm.
which is really not the case. Because if you think about it, hiring teams really want someone that can help them. And if you only have theoretical, like, knowledge, but no skills or experience, it's not
Uh,
much of an advantage, um, even if you do have that graduate degree. Now, all things being equal, your graduate degree will probably be an advantage if you also have the skills and experience to back it up. I hope that makes
yeah,
sense.
so like you were saying, you have to join like the quality improvement stuff, like
Hmm.
join those groups within your health system to at least put on your resume and show that
Hmm.
you're all about improving the informatics and nursing in general.
Exactly. So that's what I encourage nurses who, consult with me or who go through my training programs. That one of the things that they need to start doing is they need to start building a portfolio of skills and
Mhm.
experiences so that they can truly be valuable when they do land a job, right? The goal that I have in mind for them is not only to land their first job, but to be valuable contributors from the get go, where they have the basic skills to be able to start helping the informatics teams that hired them from day one.
Yeah, because I have a coworker, really
Mhm.
bright, just she's telling me that she has a hard time finding a job. And I know one of the questions is, or one of the problems is, because some nurses, as staff nurses, could also, it comes down to pay. A lot of staff nurses can make a
Mhm.
lot of monies, and then some of the ones that she was offered are less than what we
Mhm.
currently make now.
Yeah.
What would be your advice would to someone like that?
Yeah. So I got to tell you, you're asking very deep, very good questions. So So for me, I want to share that I did have to take a pay cut when I started, because I was quite generously compensated in the ICU, and I worked
Mhm.
nights and night differentials and so on. And I realized that this was no longer a bedside job, and they would likely offer me a fair compensation, but not as much as I would I had been receiving for my work in the ICU. But
Mhm.
what really encouraged me or motivated me to continue pursuing that path is because I had seen what I wanted in the future. And what I wanted in the future was a kind of career and lifestyle where I was using my strengths, my naturals, more of my natural strengths, and I was thriving in a career and a job that I looked forward to doing every day.
Hmm.
Right. So I enjoyed being an ICU nurse because of the independence and autonomy and, lots of technical skills. But I felt strongly that more of my strengths lay in the informatics route. And so I was willing to do the stepping stones that I needed to do, including sacrificing a smaller pay for a limited period of time, right? Because that was the reality at that time, and maybe for some nurses that's the reality until today. But let me tell you that I discovered in my first nursing informatics job that some nurses didn't have to take a pay cut.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yes. So that was a big aha moment to me that um, in my next, roles that I would advocate for myself more strongly. And the good news is that I actually sort of made it back in my next role because project consultants are paid quite well.
Hmm.
You do have to balance that between like benefits and actual base salary and so on. But to me, it was really just a much clearer vision of what I wanted for myself in the long term, that I was willing to take the temporary sacrifice, so to speak. And so that's what I encourage nurses to do, because not all nurses have to take a pay cut. It really depends
Hmm.
on a lot of factors, including where they're located geographically, what institution it is, whether the institution or the department, excuse me, values informatics nurses in that
Hmm.
sense, right? How much value they put to informatics nurses. And part of it is how you advocate for yourself also. Whether, you really thought like me that that's as much as I could get, and accepted that as a fact, or if you're willing to go out there and look for much better opportunities.
That's true. I like how you put that because since it's no longer like bedside, and I'm in New York, so we have like a lot of union jobs, and so it's hard to like we're not taught to like I'm assuming when you get to your expertise and moving from job to job, you could potentially negotiate salary. So
Hmm.
taking the pay cut for maybe a year or 2 years might not be a bad thing because just with every other job outside of union jobs, you could look at the benefits, negotiate pay, and you're going to have to do what everyone else does in the workforce, like j- job hop every 3 to 5 years to make sure you're compensated according to how your skills are, how
Hmm.
inflation is, everything like that. So,
Yeah, and it's different for everyone, because like me, I moved 3 times, right?
mhm,
But I've stayed in my current job or organization for almost 8 years now. And
mhm,
so that was my situation, which was different. But I have some friends who've stayed in just one or two organizations. And I have a friend who's been in one organization all her clinical career, and in the same organization for her informatics career, and compensated pretty well. So it's really different for each one. And some nurses that I know, they also had a very clear understanding and a clear vision of what they wanted to happen in their career, that they were willing to do like a like a something to help them bridge that salary gap
mhm,
until their compensation was more stable. I know some nurses who did per diem work while they were doing their nursing informatics, because they could work weekends, um,
mhm,
or pick a shift or two every, a few times a month. Or some nurses taught during the weekends or in, evenings. So there's a lot of things that you can do, but it has to be a decision that comes from you, whether you're willing to do that, or you're willing to put in the time for that future self that you envision.
That, yeah, I like that because like I think that's the hardest part for a lot of people is seeing the bigger picture at the end where
Mhm.
you get to leave the bedside, the back-breaking work, and you could potentially like what we were talking about before, that you could potentially work remote or hybrid, where that
Mhm.
also could be an expense that maybe the pay actually evens out, so you're not paying gas, toll, parking, whatever it is.
Mhm.
So a lot of things would have to come into play. But
Oh,
now sorry, you could talk.
oh no, it's very individual, right? Because I have some friends who don't want to leave the bedside at
Hmm.
all, or they can't imagine the life that I have where I have to like work remote and talk to people on the computer, and they're like, "What a boring life!" And I'm like,
I would
"I
love that.
love it, I love it," but they want to go there, be at the bedside, and it's really to each his or her own path, right? Because
Mhm.
not everyone that I know wants to leave the bedside. Absolutely.
That's true. And then let's go into what you do on the side here. You're also a businesswoman over here.
Entrepreneur.
Entrepreneur, I love it. And so, what is your main goal for your website, the Informatics Nurse?
So my website actually, the backstory of that is I actually put that up back in 2011, more for my own convenience than anything else. So let me take you back a little bit. When I first got the news that I was accepted in my first informatics job
Mhm.
position. And I was very excited. I handed in my 2 weeks notice, and I started talking to all my friends in the ICU that I'm sorry I have to leave because I'd gotten very fun. I still have some really good friends there, and so they were quite curious, right? Like, why are you leaving us in the ICU for this thing? What's it called again? So nursing informatics. I explained to them, and the news traveled around, and I suddenly had other nurses who I wasn't really very familiar with asking me some questions.
Mhm.
And then later on I got some texts about from their friends asking the same questions. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm repeating myself.
Mhm.
So the first thing that I actually did was put up a Facebook page. But as you probably know, Facebook page is not really ideal for these kind of things.
Yeah.
So I had a Facebook page in 2010, which had a very long title, but it served the purpose of, if someone asked me the same questions as other people did, I would just say, hey, I have a Facebook page, just go there. And then in 2011, I started the website because it was now like friends of friends and even like my friends from um, nursing school back in the Philippines who lived in other states who heard about what I was doing. They were asking me questions and I was spending hours on the phone.
Explaining it.
So I was like, okay, all these questions, I'm going to answer them and then you can just read my blog. So I put it up back in 2011. I got busy with my own career. So for several years, I didn't really do much. I didn't
Mhm.
update it very much. I had like several posts or articles explaining really basic things, and then I just left it there. And then fast forward several years later, I started getting comments and you know emails from most were nursing informatics master's degree students. And the reason they contacted me was they had an assignment to interview an informatics nurse. So I was the one that they found on the internet. And then I even had like a couple DNP students
Wow.
send me some questions, and so I'm like, oh, okay. Some people are finding me in on the web, so I better update these posts a little bit. So I
Mhm.
added more posts, and then maybe a couple more years down the road, I suddenly started getting these new comments and new messages asking for help with their careers. Like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, I really want to be an informatics nurse, but I don't even know the first thing to do with my resume. Can you help me through this? Or, hey, I have an interview coming up, but what are the questions that you get asked, and like, how do you answer them? Or questions similar to what you were asking earlier, like, I'm very interested, I'm in the middle of my nursing, graduate, MSN graduate degree program in nursing informatics, or have completed it, but they still couldn't land a job. So they were asking, like, what did you do? How did you do it? And all that. And so I started helping them out one by one. At first, it was like all pro bono. I wasn't charging anything. Um, and I was really happy to do it, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
when I started out, I didn't have that kind of resource, not the website, and not a real person that told me, okay, this is step one, this is step two, let me edit your resume. I didn't have anyone who did that for me. So I did a lot of trial and error. So I was very happy to be able to do that for other people. And then it suddenly, more people came to contact me, and I'm like, wait a minute, this is sounding like a second job.
Mm-hmm.
Be doing this, and my time is valuable to me. So I started, charging a little bit, but one on one can be a lot.
Yeah.
And so in 2019, I decided, let me do a group training where, I put together a distillation of my knowledge and skills and develop that into a system and really show, like, this is what you do first, this is what you do next, this is what you do afterwards. And teach that in a group setting so that we maximize our time, we're efficient with the time that we have. And I decided to sort of launch that group training
Mm-hmm.
in February 2020, just as businesses
We're
and
shutting down in COVID.
were shutting down. I'm like, I don't know, are people gonna do this? But it turns out that that was quite a fortunate, I guess, launch,
Mm-hmm.
um, because I could do the lessons remotely, and people understood that
Mm-hmm.
it is a viable way of teaching, not just knowledge but also skills. And so I've been doing that since 2020. Now, in addition to that, I do a lot of free stuff still. I, host free webinars, master classes, and all that, because what I really want to share is I want to share my knowledge and skills to as many nurses as I could.
Mm-hmm.
So some of them may decide that the free information is good enough and they can do it
Mm-hmm.
themselves, and that's totally fine. Like, I'm really happy to hear that, because I get some messages also from nurses that said, hey, I read your blog and now I have a job. And I'm like, yay. So I'm as happy to hear that as someone who says, hey, I bought your ebook, I read through it, and now I have a job. As someone, and same with someone who goes to my full group training,
Mm-hmm.
and then after a few weeks or a couple months or so, um, then they say, oh, you know what, this really worked because I have this job. Someone even sent me like a happy dance video. Like, what is this? Because the first time I looked at it, I think my phone was full, and it was like a blur of someone like doing
Just
this. And then when I finally like freed up some space in my phone, it was someone sent, who was in my group training, sending me a happy
That's awesome.
dance. So I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to be able to be a resource for other nurses, in whatever format that works for them.
And that's awesome because it shows that you're helping people. You're still a nurse. You're still
Still a
you
nurse.
like helping people.
Yes.
And so you've had this blog since
Mhm.
2011.
Yes.
Wow. And you kept it up well, like you kept it up there, and then throughout the time you're getting comments and all that. And
Hmm.
then what, just for the entrepreneurial business part, what made you finally be like, I can't keep doing this for free kind of thing, because it's becoming a second job to me?
Yeah, I think the tipping point
Hmm.
was just the number of people
Hmm.
that reached out because um, it takes time and effort
Yeah.
to really like connect and to share knowledge and information, because once I start, I really commit.
Yes.
And so I don't just like look at someone's resume, for example, and say, "Ah, do this, do this, do that." Like when I send it back, it has, comments and suggestions, and like sometimes I even move things around myself. And now there's a whole system that I actually teach
Hmm.
where the resume transformation is just one piece of the transformation that
Right.
happens, because the first thing that I encourage nurses to do is to really do a self assessment, right? Like
Hmm.
a self assessment of their own skills and experience, but also of their interests and goals.
Hmm.
Because one of the other things that I've seen is a disconnect between some nurses, like strengths, skills, and goals, and the kind of jobs that they've been applying for, because of that gap that we mentioned earlier, where some nurses think that only EHR application analyst jobs are informatics nursing jobs. So even if their strength is more of like a coordinator type informatics nurse, they've been applying for what I call developer type informatics nurse roles. And so there's a disconnect not only in the skills and experience, but some of them who do land a job, uh, when they start doing the job, they think, "Oh, this is not what I wanted," and that's from a lack of understanding to begin with, right? Of your own strengths, skills, and experience, but also of your own interests and goals.
So I love that, because I'm probably someone like that, where I might think I'm the best at everything, but it's so hard to have that sense of
Hmm.
self. So
Hmm.
how do you, okay, a lot of us nurses have very strong personalities. So how do
Hmm.
you coach someone to say, like, hey, you need to take a step back and really look at yourself, and
Hmm.
kind of take away, like, say if you have like 16 years of clinical experience but none informatics experience, or any of like those the groups that you would join within your health system, how
Hmm.
could you, how do you tell someone, be like, hey, you got to take a step back and let's consolidate this to see what you're actually qualified for, these are your skills, and this is what you should be kind of looking for?
Hmm. I've actually developed that into like really a structured system where I
Hmm.
take them on a journey of, step one, step two, step three, so that it's not a shock when
Okay.
we start transforming the resume, where I say, okay, do this instead of that, because they already have that foundation where they've first gotten a better understanding of themselves, right? So I have some tools like self assessment tools, but also knowing like what stage they're at in their journey. And so we start with that self assessment, and they're actually quite happy to get a better understanding of what it is that they truly have to bring to the table, as well as what it is that they truly want. And then part of that is knowing the gap, right?
Hmm.
Because knowing the gap is also the gap.
Yeah, that's true.
Because some of the nurses that I've worked with, like I mentioned, they either submit an application for jobs that they really weren't not so much suited for, but they really didn't have experience and skills for, while others do what I call a shotgun approach, where they update their resume, and a lot of it is like clinical words and clinical terms,
Mm-hmm.
and then just submit the same resume to like a bunch of different informatics job openings, hoping that one of them will catch or click,
Yeah.
um, which is not a very good strategy. So I explained to them the strategy of, understanding yourself, then understanding and analyzing the gap between what you currently have now versus what you want to what you want to get, like what kind of job you want to get. And and if the gap is small enough, then you can do stepping stones. So stepping stones are little activities. They're not necessarily little in terms of like the impact, but they don't require a lot of time and effort and energy and money. So for example, volunteering at your
Mm-hmm.
department to do extra activities and tasks that are informatics related, or being part of a council or committee, those are stepping stones. But if there's a gap and it's quite big, like they really want to be able to like manage projects at some point and all that, or their knowledge or their foundational knowledge is really not very much,
Mm-hmm.
then I encourage them to think of creating a bridge instead of stepping stones. So creating a bridge, bridge activities are things that require more time and energy and resources, including financial resources, but also effort and focus. So those would be your graduate degree or a specialized course or boot camp. Um, so it's very individualized depending on that person. And for the most part, I've actually fortunately come across a lot of nurses who were open to going through that process, um, as I structured it in my training program. There are some nurses actually who actually go ahead of the program when they start seeing like, oh, okay, the pieces are starting to fit together,
Mm-hmm.
and that is what I've been missing all along. They actually like accelerate faster than the
Mm-hmm.
group, and that's totally fine. I'm really happy when I see that also. An example for this would be, in one of my earlier groups, there was a nurse who had completed um, their MSN in informatics, and they had been looking for jobs and applying for jobs for 18 months before they met me.
Mm-hmm.
And like really doing the whole Google Academy, YouTube
Yeah.
University, like everything, but just couldn't couldn't land the job. And they had interviewed a couple times and so on. So um, I actually gave them the option of either doing the individualized, because I still do that sometimes, especially for those who are in the advanced stages, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where like there's just one little thing that they need. And so they don't have to go through the group because they already have a portfolio of skills and accomplishments. And so I said, you could go with a group or you can go one on one.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, okay, I'll go with a group because I want to see like how it's done by others. And so we were going through the group together. And by the second week, they were getting like everything fell into place for them, that they were getting invitations to interview, and they call them hits. Like
Mm-hmm.
I got a hit on my um, my resume. And so the other nurses in the group were still like, revising the resume, transforming it. This nurse was starting to go and interview. And so what we found out was that we really needed to focus on their interviewing skills. And
Mm-hmm.
so we did that during the mock interview sessions. And it was very exciting because they got two job offers, like
Oh, wow.
one after the other, and had a really good problem of trying to decide which one was a better offer. So it's you know, it's different for each person, but I guess what I was trying to share is that I've developed the training so that there is a structure and a process. Now, within that structure and the process, nurses who feel confident to go faster actually can and do.
Hmm.
Another example that I have was a much younger or newer nurse, and when she met me. She actually was working, I think, in Florida at a small hospital,
Hmm.
and I I could tell from our interactions that she was really smart. She graduated from her nursing BSN program with high honors, but just had some really like lower self confidence at that time. And that was the beginning of COVID, and I'm sure there was a lot of challenges, and they were like, I don't know if I'm going to be a really good nurse and so on. And through the program, this nurse saw her value and her skills more, and she started applying some of the concepts that I teach, the skills that I teach, and techniques that I teach in her own unit. And at the same time, I didn't know she was already applying for another job. So her own unit actually acknowledged her for a, a good safety catch, I think it was
Hmm.
called. Like she caught something that should have not have been happening. But with that like new confidence, she was able to land a job at a bigger hospital in that area. And during the when she was offered the job, she actually negotiated that she be a super user.
Hmm.
Um, like off the bat, like she said, I'm interested in going to a nursing informatics, career, and so I'll take this job, but you need to make me a super user. So I'm
Wow.
like, wow, that took guts and confidence, but that was one of the side effects of going through my training program. So it doesn't always have to be that nurses who go through my program immediately land their first nursing informatics jobs. They could land a stepping stone job,
Hmm.
right, to get to where they want to go. But at the same time, what I really encourage them to do is to add value to their workplace now by using the techniques that I teach. It's not just for themselves, right? So they're gaining skills and knowledge, but they're also giving back now to their unit. So they're
Hmm.
valuable to their unit now.
Yeah, building up their own confidence as well with their
Mhm.
skills.
Mhm.
And I know you're pretty much already giving the master class right here, it sounds like. So, but obviously, interviewing for a regular nursing job is probably way different than an informatics job. Do you mind giving like an example of what kind of questions they might ask?
Sure. So there's going to be some questions about, using the keywords that I mentioned earlier,
Hmm.
data, using data, abusing technology, how familiar you are with those concepts, whether you've experienced doing that kind of work in the past. Like, have you analyzed data? Have you collected data? What did you do with the data that you collected?
Hmm.
So you need to show whether you gained insights, what you did with the insights that you gained, right? Did you participate in those activities or projects that created improvements out of the
Hmm.
insights that you gathered from your data? Um, and usually there's behavioral interview questions, like how do you work in a team setting? Um, what would you do if you're part of a project and things don't go the way you thought they would? So just trying to gauge whether you can actually do the job skills wise and also have some of the soft skills like the interpersonal skills that that are needed to work in a setting where there could be a lot of other nurses like you, or there could be a mix of nurses and non-nurses and even non-clinicians.
That's true. That's probably the
Mhm.
hard part for a lot of people to get their head around too, is that you're not gonna potentially be working with just nurses and other clinicians or providers, where it's gonna
Mm,
be other people in like IT in general, or other parts of informatics.
yeah. And so the perspective that I bring to that interview prep, because that's part of the training program as well, is that I've been on both sides of the table, right?
Hmm.
I've been an applicant for my first three jobs, and and then after I became a manager, I've been on the other side of the table where I was the one asking questions and analyzing and evaluating the answers. So I've been on both sides of the table. I have had all this experience working with different informatics teams, both clinicians and non-clinicians. So I know the mindset of, in general, of what they're thinking through when they sit at that table asking the questions, right? And usually it's really quite simple, really.
Hmm.
It's, can this person do the job that we want them to do? Can they contribute? And can they work well together with our team? So that's, that's very simplified, but in general, that's
Hmm.
really what it is. Part of it also is learning to speak their language, which is another thing that I teach in the training program. Because a lot of nurses, we are in the beginning, we're very used to speaking with other clinicians. So we speak in clinical terms. It's a kind of
Hmm.
like a shorthand
Yeah.
um, of like showing your skill by saying all these like acronyms and secret terminologies like, yes, I know pick line care and I'm really great at ECMO and I can do CVVH. Gonna be It's gonna be challenging to kind of change your mindset about that and actually try to speak the language that's being spoken by
Hmm.
informatics terms, by informatics teams, even when there's clinicians, because those clinicians also think more in an informatics sense. So you're not going to be really impressing people by saying, oh, I know how to do patient assessments and administer meds, because those are really basic things.
Hmm.
Everyone, all nurses are expected to know how to do those things.
Hmm.
But do you know how to, like I mentioned earlier, analyze data? Do you know how to gain insights from certain, when you see patterns? Like, can you can you glean meaningful insights from, let's say, compliance rates to fall risk, right? If you are presented with five different compliance rates for five different units, and one of the units has much lower compliance rates from the other four, what kind of insight can you gain from that? So that's an example of like a skill that you need to show or develop. And another thing would be to articulate your thoughts and
Hmm.
tell a story in a structured manner, where at the end of the at the end of that story, you tell them the the specific skill that you learn based on your experiences. So again, that's there's techniques to do that, and some of the techniques that I teach in my
Hmm.
training program are the same techniques taught in giant tech companies like Amazon and Google,
Hmm.
um, but I contextualize it in the nursing informatics context, so that nurses who go through the program, they get an aha moment. I'm like, oh, okay, that's how to share the story of what I did for my unit in such a way that this informatics hiring team can understand like exactly what I did and what the informatics skills I had demonstrated in that particular situation.
Wow, this was like super
Like,
insightful. Like, this is the most I feel like I've let someone talk, because I'm like just so interested in it. I was like, oh, totally different than all the clinical aspects that I've been doing for so long. And I don't want them, because you have so much information that you want to give people, and I don't want you just to share it all here. But
It's okay. Yeah, I'm actually used to, like, if you let me talk about nursing informatics, I can just talk for hours. So you have to stop me.
but I need to send people to your website, and obviously we're going on an hour here already. So if
Mhm.
anyone wanted to contact you, what is the best way for them to reach out to you?
They can email me at info@theinformaticsnurse.com. I also have an Instagram account at the Informatics Nurse that has a lot of tips. You've been there, so it has a lot of tips. Some maybe I attempt to be humorous, but I'm not as funny as you. So it's mostly tips and good information for
Mhm.
them to get started on. I also run free webinars and master classes a few times a year. So if they can catch that, I would certainly encourage them to do that. And then, of course, there's a group training program.
Mhm.
They can get more information on my website, theinformaticsnurse.com.
And I will put all of those in the description to the podcast here. And I just want to say thank you so much for reading my DM to be a guest here on the show.
Of course. And actually, it's thanks to Kai, because I follow her, and then I saw her. I think her interview, her podcast with you. So yeah, and I went to your feed, and you have some really good, funny reels over there. So
Yeah, I'm just
I appreciated your sense of humor.
yeah. I try to make it a little bit lighthearted while I can. So again, thank you so much for hanging out with me for about an hour.
Thanks, Brian, and stay in touch.
I will. Thank you so
All
much.
right, you're
All
welcome.
right. Bye.
Bye.